Hey, everybody, this is Cassidy, founder and creator of the Caregivers Hub, coming to you today. Super excited. Every single month at the beginning of the month, the first Sunday of the month, we do these hangouts where I'm representing the collective. So I love to bring you people who are inspirational, who have been where you have been as caregivers, and who are making an impact in this community, in this industry. And Lorna Scott is one of those people. So Lorna, it's been probably about a year since we've kind of been following each other, and you've been in a part of the hub.
Yeah, that would seem about right.
It sounds about right. I mean, the awesome thing that I love about this community, and at least the caregiving community in general, is that we are able to network and connect. And I believe that in this industry in general, we need to work together to achieve the best results possible for the people we care for and for ourselves. So on that note, if you are new to the Caregivers Hub, welcome. If you don't know what it is a support group for caregivers on Facebook. If you are providing mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual care to somebody, this is the community for you. You are welcome. And I'm just basically going to give Lorna the platform to share her caregiving journey, how she started, created, and is successfully what's the word I'm looking for? You are continuing to develop so many. Every time I turn around, Lorna, you're doing a webinar, you're speaking, you're writing, you're training, and I love that. So this is your platform. Come on out and tell us about who you are and what you do.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Cassidy. This is exciting, and I find the online support for caregivers is such an important piece to their own survival a lot of times, and it fits with so many things. And I love the Customer Hub. It's one of the busiest groups that's out there. And one of the things that I love the most is that you have both professional and family caregivers there, and family. So I love the blend, because then we get to understand each other. So I am Lorna, and I'm from Canada, Medicine Hat, Alberta.
That's right. Oh, I'm so Medicine Hat. So I'm from a teeny tiny town. Oh, it's not teeny tiny. I guess, how big is Medicine Hat?
63,000.
Okay, so Havre is 12,000. Well, it's 10,000 now and dwindling. But Havre is 45 miles from the Canadian border. And we used to go up to Canada at 18 because it's legal to drink there. So up to Medicine Hat we went. I'm just saying, I love Medicine Hat. It's a super awesome place.
Well, I hope I'm not giving any trade secrets out there, but Havre we kind of consider part of our, is almost one of our suburbs, even though, it's get away. But that is where we can have things delivered to in the U.S., and it's easier and cheaper to drive down, pick them up, and bring them home. So
exactly.
Yeah, I've never done that yet, but I know people who do that all the time. So
well, and my mom actually, because my mom lives in Havre, she's been working with those pumps for for people with edema. They fill with air and they wrap around the legs. Have you ever seen those?
Yeah. So
she's working with a company who's wanting to expand into Canada, and that's kind of their go-between. Maybe I hope I'm not giving any trade secrets away either. But hey, I love Medicine Hat. I love that you've been to Havre. You actually know where it is.
I do. I even had a drink in a bar there once. I think. Oh, just a minute.
Well, that's not uncommon. There are 19 bars in Havre.
12,000 people. Yeah, you are part of Alberta. That's kind of.
I have a funny story actually about that, because my grandmother, my great grandmother, and I think my great aunts live in Moose Jaw, and my grandma was telling me this story that my great grandmother had given her a Christmas cactus when she went up to visit. And my grandma got all paranoid because you know, she didn't want to get caught with this Christmas cactus going through the border. And she said the closer and closer and closer they got, the more nervous she got. And so she's like, I just chucked it out the window. I was like, oh, that poor Christmas cactus.
Yeah. 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 Sometimes those border, you know, it's tough, and some days tougher, but that's one of the things that's great about the internet is that we don't have
We need borders.
No.
Exactly.
So I am from Southern Alberta, and I've lived in 3 provinces. So I've had a good variety of learning Canadian in 3 different provinces, because it's been 3 different experiences. So I can hardly imagine what it's like with over 50 states. But that in Alberta is really where I first realized that there was even such a thing as caregiving. And my husband had been diagnosed with colorectal cancer. And even that first little bit, you know, through that diagnosis and the initial treatment, surgery, and some post-op treatment, I didn't really ever consider myself a caregiver. It sucked. We were 44 years old and turning 45 the year that he had surgery, and we kind of got the, okay, we're just going to keep an eye on it. So, but life was certainly different after that, because even with a bit of a break, we had the, you know, oh, there's another test coming up, and it was stage 3C. So it was, the next was stage 4. He had a 50-50 chance of living more than 5 years. So it wasn't that we had any, you know, real big pie in the sky thoughts that he might live till 90. We hoped, because they still gave us that hope. And we had another move. We did this twice, where we moved, both started new jobs, and he got sick. That happened to us twice. And it was when the cancer had metastasized, and that I would say that was more of my pivotal point of saying, okay, now I'm into this. I didn't know what to call it at the time. Just realized that it was going to be different, and mostly fed because I had a friend whose husband a few years earlier had passed away at age 50 of cancer. And she was quite bitter and resentful for a long, long time. And I didn't want to be that person. So for me, a lot of it was the caregiving, but what touched me a lot was what it was doing to me. And I tried a couple of times to build businesses, and he'd get a job or he'd get sick. It just seemed that every time I tried to move forward. So there was just a little bit of that whole women's issue thing too. Like, when do I get my day in the sun and damn it?
Right? Oh, I know. I get you.
Yeah. So what happened through those 3 years, I started blogging and had lots of people say you should write a book. What really, you know, one of the things that was just surprised us a lot in the 3 years that he lived with metastasized cancer was how often people in the same situation wouldn't think some of the same things we did or live life. I think cancer, any kind of chronic or terminal disease, people rise to many do. The odd person doesn't, you know, for however they handle it, but for the most part, this strength comes through and determination. But some of the things that came easy to us, that like in managing things, like the one lady was sitting in the waiting room, and she said, like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm working, and you know, I get up and I do this and I do that for him, and I go to work and I come home, and then I've got laundry to do and I've got this to do, and I don't even know how I'm gonna, you know, and the grass is 6 inches high, and I looked at her and said, could I hire somebody? Like, do you have a friend or a neighbor? And she kind of went, oh, yeah. It was outside her thought that anybody could help her.
Right.
And that it would be easy, and that people would even want to. Now, I say that saying that, you know, I accepted some help, but we were really on our own. In that city, we literally knew more people in the cancer center than we ever had friends or colleagues in those 3 years, because that's where we were centered. Mm-hmm. So I learned a lot about like living day to day and planning 3 months, 6 months out. That particular disease brings you to planning like in three-month increments, because generally the testing is done every 3 months, and other diseases likely have their own little rhythm to that. So most often we would plan like 6 months out in okay, that's what we'd like to do. And then we'd actively plan 3 months out. And, if it didn't work out, well, it didn't work out, but we always wanted to be having something to look forward to. It wasn't rosy by any means. There was lots of ups and downs. If we hadn't ever taken the steps to intentionally do that, and I can talk about that a little bit about what happened for me that led down that road. What I don't want to miss, and if I don't say it now, I'm going to forget.
Bring it on.
Is that once I started delving into the caregiving world, what I found is that actually I had been a secondary caregiver likely 6, 7, 8 years before that, when my dad was sick. And he had been on disability at home for a while, and they were retired. So they were kind of the pseudo-retired, and he was generally okay. He could drive, and, there were some things that, but again, that slow progression leading up to long-term care. And just being with my mom when he was in acute care before he was stable enough to go into long-term care. There was just lots of things that our life just changed. And, in some ways we were blessed. It was only a matter of months. We didn't do this for years. But I worked shift work at the time. I worked 12-hour shifts and worked 2 days, 2 nights, and 4 off. So I would go on my 2 nights, like on my day shifts, I'd come home and go visit my dad. And then I usually would visit during the day of my first night shift. And I didn't usually go after my second night shift. Sometimes if I went, or I would miss the changeover day and go get up and then go. It kind of depended on what was going on in the evening. Now, certainly I did some other things there that it wasn't always 3 out of 4 days, but it was a lot. It was quite often that, and it was just mostly to visit. When I'm on my days off, I would be going, and that's when I could give my mom more of a break because she was there from morning to night. She planned a weekend away, and he had a crash weekend, and she was all ready to go away, and everything was in place for me to step in and visit. And then he got pneumonia, and it was like, we don't know if he'll make it through the weekend. She canceled the plans. And I never thought at that point I never even really thought my mom about that she was a caregiver. I knew it was a tough time. It was getting overwhelming. She had a lot on her plate. This was so long ago. Titanic was the movie in the theaters, because that was it. My daughter and I took her to Titanic to get her out for an evening, because at that point she could do that. But she was there because she just felt that was her job to do. Mm-hmm. So when I look back now, I realize that was kind of the start of it. And even with some of the health issues that he had before, it was pretty minor overall. But there's those things slowly creep up, and then all of a sudden your life changes when it really didn't all of a sudden change.
I know. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you know this, but what I do is I'm a hospice aide. Mm-hmm. So I've been a CNA for 14 years, and that's kind of one thing that I tell the families when I see them so overwhelmed is I know this is difficult for you. I know this is something we've always thought about, but right now we are here, and now you are faced with providing end of life care to somebody. So it is such a monumental task to take, and I applaud you for doing that. And my deepest condolences on the loss of your husband. And I thank you for sharing your journey, because as you know, there are so many of people with your story, the same story, that need to know that they're not alone and that they have resources and that they can reach out for help. Like that lady who had just said, oh, it never even occurred to her to ask a neighbor to mow her lawn. And I think we get stuck in that because sometimes we're prideful. We don't feel like that people want to help us, that people want to do that for us. So,
well, yeah, one of the, a couple of the things that I teach about asking for help, one is that people really do want to help. And so one of the things that I found easy to do And in our situation, which is going to be very similar to many, and adaptable for the rest of them, because really this anybody can do this, is for things that need to get done that maybe don't need to be done in 5 minutes. And that is a good question to even start with, is, you know, do you want it done, and does it need to be done? Because sometimes those are two different answers.
That's a good question to ask, though, for sure.
You know,
do I need this or do I want this? I think that foregoes caregiving as well. Do I need this or do I want this?
Yeah. So I would keep, because there got to a point where Callum couldn't help me with a lot of things. So sometimes it wasn't that I couldn't do it, it's just that I didn't have 4 hands. Mm-hmm. And I would need an extra pair of hands, or I would need the strength. So I just kept a running list of the things that needed done, and people would visit us. And when they would visit us, because they always would say, what can I do? I would give them the list, because if I hadn't had the list, I often would forget. And I go, you know, and then it was just easy to say, oh, no, I don't need any help, you know, we'll manage, because I just couldn't darn well think of anything when somebody would ask the question. So I started keeping the list. And that way, when people would ask, I just gave them the list, and then they could choose what they were comfortable doing. They didn't have to say yes to something they couldn't do or didn't want. Like it made that a whole lot better. And the other thing that I found was, you know, when Callum was first diagnosed, I mean, it was overwhelming completely. And my in-laws came out, because they lived 12 hours away, but they came out for, you know, well, I think over a period of 5 months, they were there off and on for 3 of them. And I remember the first day that they came, and they actually met us at the hospital. Callum was having colonoscopy. We went home, had supper. Callum and I got up and went to work the next day, came home. I expected supper to be ready, because, like, they sat there all day, right?
Yes.
I kind of went, you know, they weren't in there. My mother-in-law was just very, you know, nice and polite, and went, you know, I just didn't know what you'd like to eat, so I didn't know what to cook. And in my head, I'm going, food. Would you just... like, food, I don't care. Just, you know, I had this preconceived notion that they were parents coming to look after us.
Yeah.
I totally forgot that they were parents coming because their 44-year-old son had just been diagnosed with cancer. And my mother-in-law was a cancer survivor. Her mother passed away from cancer. Like, I totally missed the boat on that. But what I found through some of that was that it just became my pre-planning, and I'm a bit of a planner and organizer, was to set the rules the next time they came. And it worked. I said, this is what you've got. This is what you can do for me. Have at her. I'm not interrupting. Like,
yeah.
And we, even when Callum had surgery, went to the point where we pre-made a whole pile of meals, and I left the instructions on top, taped to the lid of everything in the freezer. Of what they would need, you know, if they needed to add any ingredients, or if they'd have to go get fresh stuff from the store. Mm-hmm. And that really worked. But what the nugget of information that I found in there is that people want to give. And if we would just take a moment, like even 30 seconds, and think about how good we feel when we help somebody and when we give to somebody, that we are giving people a gift by asking. And when they, and accepting, not just asking. Sometimes we'll ask and then we don't accept.
Okay. Well, and I think we assume that they know what we need, you know, and they don't. I mean, and it's so, actually, there's a life lesson in that too. My boyfriend, same thing. It's crazy. His mother said to me early on, Cassidy, just write him a list. You want him to do something, don't tell him. Write him a list. Because I could say a million times, vacuum this, clean the toilet, blah, 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 and it goes in here and out there. And I learned that she has preconditioned him since a child to go off this checklist. And it's the same thing. I know if I write it down, specific instructions, I know he's going to do it. If I tell him, 50-50.
Yeah. And that's, you know, the list, the communication, it just helps with a lot of that. And accepting the help, just you let people be, they're happy and they're grateful to be able to help. And they, you know, our friends and family really and truly inside would change anything if they could, and they can't. So, I mean, what I find with a lot of caregivers is it's just overwhelming. You don't have time to stop and think, and that's why I started the list.
Yeah.
And now with phones, you could do a voice note. I mean, this was back when I still had a BlackBerry with a rollerball. Like,
there were no smartphones. That was the smartphone.
I had the smartest phone out there, Cassidy. Glorious pictures.
You know what I was thinking about as you were talking about help and accepting help, and this is what I've noticed. Because we have a lot of Alzheimer's and dementia caregivers in the Caregivers Hub, and what I hear perpetually, and not just in the Caregivers Hub, but in a lot of Alzheimer's and dementia groups in general, is that the isolation is overwhelming, because Alzheimer's can last, I mean, sometimes Alzheimer's journeys are 15, 12 years, you know what I'm saying? And whereas cancer, as devastating as it is, like you had said, it tends to be a shorter time period. You weren't doing it for years. So I think that asking for help with those short-term diagnoses and rallying, as opposed to these long-term things like MS, ALS, Alzheimer's, all of these things that really take a lot of bed-bound work for a long time. I hear it all the time. People say, my family and my friends disappear. And I'm kind of, in my head, I'm kind of wondering, like, okay, what is the difference between people willing to help with a cancer diagnosis and people willing to help with an Alzheimer's and dementia diagnosis?
Yeah. Well, and in one ways, I would say there's no difference, because for the most part, our experience with cancer was a little different because we were in a community where we really were alone. So we were 5 hours away from our closest family member. I was working, and our age was likely a different factor as well, because
that's true.
We had some connection there. But generally, like, many people will support somebody with cancer and support the family, but I would say that it's more from afar. Like, you get a lot of comments on Facebook, you get maybe phone calls, and there's some of that emotional support, which is something, but it is still one of those things that somebody says cancer and nobody knows what to do.
Right. Well, because it's a journey. I mean, you don't know, unless you've dealt with cancer before, you don't know what that road means for you as a person. Ultimately how it's going to change your life, but until you're in the mix of providing somebody care like that and dealing with all of those things like you did, I don't think that anybody's really prepared for that until they're on that journey.
No, and I say those things just because sometimes it's, even within the cancer world, it looks like one type of cancer gets more support than another, and there is, but there's good and bad. It's like everything else. You only really likely hear about 30 to 40% of what's really going on with any particular family when you're seeing on Facebook. I think that, they each have their downfalls, and maybe some of the better parts. The long term is, with the long term illnesses like Parkinson's and ALS and dementia and Alzheimer's, versus the shorter term, but the shorter term's more acute and more
right.
So, as far as the impact, I think it just is what it is, and everybody's worst day is just their worst day. I do think what happens within, at least from what I've seen within the dementia and Alzheimer's world, one thing is you lose the person before you lose the body. And that happens in the chronic, like, I would say that I look back at pictures of my husband and I can't sometimes even recognize him. I never thought he changed that much when we were living it, but he did. But I think when you lose that contact with mind, and that lasts for a long time, that can happen within, and I'll pick on the cancer world. My husband had lots of funny behaviors because of
medication
and chemo the effects of the chemo and the effects of brain radiation. I'm getting some feedback. Are you getting some feedback?
A little bit, but not much.
Okay.
I think we're good.
You know, when he chose the whole brain radiation, and they talked about the side effects, and they kind of went, "You're not going to live long enough to have any of them." I'm like, yeah, I mean, they say things like that.
I know. I guess that surprises me because, you know, I mean, for the most part, I've dealt with geriatric care, and I've dealt with a lot of, you know, as a hospice aide, I've taken care of many cancer patients. But my main experiences and expertise has geared towards Alzheimer's and dementia. So the fact that they use those words almost seems kind of cold to me.
Yeah, well, and they might have been a little nicer than what I just did. You know, I mean, we were talking at that point that if he was lucky, he would live 12 months. I mean, they'd already said that. So, you know, and that the effects were, you know, 2 to 3 years out, the cognitive impact, and who knows whether that was part of it. You know, by the end, he had so many different medications, and who knows what the cancer was doing inside once they quit checking, and, you know, all that stuff. But with Alzheimer's and dementia, because it's so long, you know, and the respite is so little.
Oh man, I know.
And I think going back to your question about, you know, the friends and family and the isolation, people just become so uncomfortable because they can't fix it.
Right.
And if they see a behavior, like, there may be some fear at some point during that as well. If they see some odd behaviors, they might, you know, it's kind of like taking on the baby who has the little machine for SIDS. Like, are you going to babysit that baby? Because, you know, maybe, I don't know. I look at sometimes the end of life and babies there's a lot of similarities.
There are. I mean, we're basically physically taking care of somebody who cannot take care of themselves physically.
And somebody pointed out to me the difference is the baby has the full life ahead of them, and people who are end of life, which I consider end of life. I mean, there's this various stages. You would know more about that technically. But, you know, we lived 3 years with my husband dying.
Right. I know. And it can.
End of life was, you know, 5 days.
Right. Well, and that is the thing, you know, there is a difference between transitioning and actively transitioning. And, you know, I understand what you're saying. People can be deteriorating for a very, very, very long time, but the actual physical act of actively dying it is days for sure.
Yeah. And that was, you know, it was the strangest thing to me at that time. I said, you know, we knew for 3 years that he had a terminal diagnosis. You know, the best guess they could give us was a year. And when it had metastasized to his bone 2 years after that, and I said, what does that change to his prognosis? And actually the radiation oncologist laughed and said, he has outlived any guess that we could ever make. So, like, enjoy every day.
Right.
His answer. And we'd lived through sepsis. We'd lived through, you know, the nurse. I was talking to him one day, eating an apple, and before I could finish the apple, having a nurse with her arm around me saying, "Does he want to be intubated? You guys have been through a lot already. You know, how far do we go with this?" Because he went into respiratory distress when he had sepsis, and, you know, they didn't expect him to make it through the night. They didn't tell me that till the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Having 12 white coats surrounding around his bed, going, "What are we going to do?" kind of tells you on its own. But I still felt he died fast.
Yeah.
Like it was so weird. And, you know, my daughter, the day he passed away, my daughter went into work, and her boss sent her to the hospital and said, "You need to go. Like, we'll figure this out." But because we'd been there, like, we'd sat in those hospitals, you know, is he going to make it? Is he not? What's going on? Blah, blah. You know, nobody trusted that he was actually dying.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was just the weirdest thing. And we did have, you know, we had that typical, you know, I had to say, I need half an hour, 45 minutes with him alone. That morning, he'd already started pulling away. I stayed with him for those 5 days. I never left the hospital. I slept beside him in the room. And, you know, every night we held hands until the last night. And then he didn't, you know, he was just not as responsive. And so the next morning, I did my half hour, 45 minutes. You know, I told him all along he could go, I thought. But
Yeah.
I had, you know, kind of had to replay our 30 some years together and, you know, reassure him everybody was going to be okay. And, you know, like it was 4 hours later, he passed away.
And, you know, I just feel so strongly within myself always that we never, ever know, because the soul chooses when it's time to go.
Yeah.
And you never know what it's going to be. I mean, I've had people hold vigil for so many days, and the minute they go to the bathroom or the minute they go to the cafeteria is that moment where their loved one chooses to go. And people ask me all the time, well, when is it time? And I can't tell you when. All I can tell you is, you know, that we're going to do everything that we can to support you until that time and through that time. But we never truly know when someone is going to choose to take their leave.
No. You know, it's, you can only do what you can do during the time. And I do believe you're right. I had a friend stay with me when her dad was, he was failing, and she had been there till 3 a.m. She came back to the house. She was there half an hour when she got the phone call, and the staff were absolutely flabbergasted because they said our 15-minute check and everything, like there was nothing, no reason that we would have ever thought. And 15 minutes later, he was gone. And that was just his choice. But it, you know, that's a whole different, you know, as I think, especially for professional caregivers, because we're in such a, you know, our own world. The one thing I would say that if I, you know, to impart some wisdom on that stage from years of caregiving, and I, you know, we were 6 years in that cancer journey. But so many caregivers have that strong face and demeanor. And many things happened, and some of the decisions that I made that people questioned, but I didn't find out about it till 2 or 3 years later. And actually, when I say, well, I've made some decisions, but Callum and I had many talks so that I could fill his wishes. Sometimes I warned him. I said, if you don't pick your music, then I'm playing Celine Dion. And if you want to be in the room with Celine Dion, that's fine. Don't pick your music. Well, he had his music picked within an hour. So, I love Celine Dion. He doesn't. So, you know, we had lots of those conversations, but many, you know, when I realized after that many people thought I was making the decisions just because I was speaking.
Right.
And I look back and I think I thought I was making some good decisions, and you know, I didn't make anything that, you know, is, you know, harmed anyone. There was no harm in but some that I really maybe shouldn't have been making at the time. Mm-hmm. I had a counselor at the time, and I asked her, you know, like, did you think I was doing okay? She said, you looked like you had it all together. There was not anything to show that you weren't doing okay. And I've noticed that with, maybe more, I don't know if I put an age on it, but I think that there's sometimes when that, especially a spouse passes away, that some spouses look like they really are doing okay, and they're making decisions, and they're really not. And they're saying, I am making good decisions. I know what I'm doing. I mean, one of the benefits we had for 3 years was I could plan what I was going to do after, which was scary, but, and not that I planned everything, but we had some of those weird discussions about after. But still, like, it's like, oh, you know, why did I do that?
Yeah, and we run into that in the hub a lot, and that's one thing I'm always busting out a good video about how we should always respect each other's caregiving decisions, because even though they're not ours, they're somebody else's. And I mean, there's I don't want to say there's no rule book, but I mean, you don't know until you're in that and you're making those decisions. And if, you were blessed that you were able to have those conversations with your husband, and you could plan, and you could have real talks about what's happening. But sometimes what happens is people are in such denial about what is happening to them and how it's going to affect them, that they choose not to have those conversations. And I'm not saying that that's good or that's bad. Like my philosophy is, most people cling to denial like it's their best friend, when it's truly their worst enemy. And I hold true to that, because if we don't at least make ourselves aware to what is happening. That's why I always tell people, if you're coming down the pipeline with a dementia or Alzheimer's diagnosis for your loved one, take the initiative and make yourself educated. Do the best that you can to prepare yourself, because it's going to pay off in the long run. And you're going, as hard as it is, to be able to face those decisions and make those decisions maybe a little bit better than if you weren't prepared. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, there's absolutely no point in telling anybody it's a wrong decision.
Right.
And I just see, it's just one of those. It's been 5-6 years since Callum passed away, so and it's likely been the last 2 years that I've even increased that awareness of. And it's more of the decisions I made after he passed away than beforehand, because I learned very easy that my decisions, like what that was another part, was just when we wanted different things, and learning to let him take the lead with some of that. I think that's got to be incredibly hard when there's dementia and Alzheimer's involved, because you don't, especially at that beginning, you're not really sure.
Right. Well, and I think that, there's such for as long as it's been around, right? Like let's not fool ourselves and say that 50, 60 years ago, when you thought grandpa was senile, he probably actually had dementia or Alzheimer's. We just didn't talk about it. We weren't educated about it. We don't know about it. And so now that it's slowly becoming into the spotlight, because 1 in 3 people, 1 in 3. Yeah. And 5 years ago, it was 1 in 6. So
yeah,
that's massive. That's an epidemic. And so I think we're still writing the book on that, on how do we deal with Alzheimer's and dementia? How do we deal with these things? And, I love people with Alzheimer's and dementia. They are some of my favorite patients. I don't know why. It just becomes, I don't know. Maybe it's just a thing that I have, that I am able to not necessarily communicate with people who can't communicate, but to care for them in a way that is still respectful of who they are as a person, despite the fact that they can't communicate. And yeah, that's a whole nother hangout.
Yeah. Well, it is something, because my experience is limited. There's certainly Alzheimer's and dementia in the family, but I'm hours away from them. So it's I know more from the caregiver, from the caregiving side, families, and definitely through some of the workshops and things, that it's just a different, it's just a different ball of wax. And
it is a
support, and I think when you talk about like 1 in 3, our population is aging so much. So I think there's a couple of things that come in. One is we're living longer than 100 years ago. So where somebody may have had some form of dementia they likely died before it got to a point where we're seeing it now in some
Right.
cases. But
Well, yeah.
now with
And
the population, I mean, there's just so many things, and that the push to age in place sounds really good. It, as long as there's support for the caregiver.
right. Well, and they get lost. And this is one thing that I think about often, and how it has been easy for me in one way or another to relate to families who are dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia is, and the gap, right? I feel like there's a gap between professional caregivers and family caregivers. We, everybody's dealt with that family as a professional caregiver who, either they don't like you, or they're not happy with your care, or they're just difficult in general. And so the one thing that I always try to make sure that professional caregivers understand is that by the time family caregivers come to us, by the time their loved ones come to us, they are at the end of their ropes. They're tired. They don't have any money. They've given up their careers, their relationships. And this is mainly, I don't know how this is for cancer, but I've seen this many times with Alzheimer's and dementia. And, where families don't like the caregivers. And granted, there's some pretty shitty care out there. There is some horrendous care, and rightly so. The trust is broken out there, and I've done a hangout on that before. But we have to remember as professional caregivers that it's our responsibility to care for people the way that they want to be cared for. And that means putting the way that we think they should be cared for aside and care for them the way that they want to be cared for.
Yeah.
And that's massive. So remember that, families, when you get a caregiver, find a way to respectfully communicate with them how you want your loved one to be cared for. And I would hope that anybody as a professional caregiver would be open to listening to that.
Yeah. Well, and it's sometimes I think that gap, you've got professional caregivers who are doing this day in and day out, and may show up at a house at 1 o'clock knowing that the person they just saw at 10, that they're never going to see them again.
Right.
Or most likely. Like the things that you carry with you. And it's nice to say, well, you should be able to leave that, but you don't. You have a heart.
True. But I feel like there's a way to bring your heart. Okay, so here's a perfect scenario. The other day, it was like 90 flipping degrees here, and it was so hot. I was boiling. And my last patient of the day, when I walked in, I said, well, how are you today? And she said, well, I'm hot. And as I was putting together this bed bath, and I'm getting the water warm, I just kind of thought to myself, like, if I was hot, the last thing I would want is someone to bathe me in hot water. So I just asked her, I said, this is going to sound really weird. I said, but you said you're pretty hot. And I was thinking, how would you feel if we gave you a cool bed bath, right? It's not cold, but it's not hot. And her eyes lit up, and she's like, you can do that. And I said, I can absolutely do that for you. And I gave her this nice, cool bed bath. And by the time I left, she was clean and she felt cool. And that's what I'm saying is you can put aside how you feel that someone needs to be taken care of, and still hold on to your skills as a clinician and use your heart and provide that person the care that they want, because we are in service of those people. Right? We are in service of these souls. So it's not our responsibility to impress upon them how we think they should be cared for. It's our job to use our skills that we've been taught as clinicians and put them towards people's care in a way that allows them to be cared for mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, Lorna Scott.
Well, yes. And Yes. I also spent 6 years as a 911 dispatcher, so
Oh.
yeah, you can do that, and yet there's still a little. I actually just wanted to give you guys a bit of a break. That sometimes, you might only be at 99% when you walk in.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's days,
and
when I don't have it. The garden center at Lowe's looks really damn good.
Well, and that's not a, again, it's not a judgment or anything.
Right.
You're people, and sometimes, with the gap is that sometimes your build is the hero that's going to come and make everything better for an afternoon, and sometimes that isn't possible.
Right.
Right. And I shouldn't say it's likely always possible to make it better.
Right. But we can't change things, and we can't always fix everything. But I understand what you're saying, because I think that I kind of live by the philosophy as you're always do your best, and your best is always changing.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, maybe it's the professionalism in me. I just know that no matter what I'm experiencing in my life, and no matter what is happening at that time, this is the moment where I ultimately have to put my shit aside, and I have to step up and serve this person in the best way that I know how. And that's why I win awards for my care. Not to toot my own horn, but I am. So
the next part of that is then having the support for yourself to put that in the right place in your life so that it doesn't build up.
Right. And, as caregivers, as you know, we oftentimes are very self-sacrificial. We put everybody's needs and wants and everything before our own. And that is why every single night after I get home, and this is no bullshit, Daniel knows it is my hour to turn up my music as loud as possible, for me to sit in the bathtub until it is cold. If that's 2 hours, that's 2 hours. But that is my time to deal with and reflect upon the things that I've gone through in my day. And that's how I'm able to do this work. And it's because I do provide myself that self-care at the end of every day. And I have that luxury because I get to go home as a professional caregiver. So I know it's super difficult for caregivers who are in the thick of it 24 hours a day. That's why we have to focus on those goods. That's why we do our goods posts in the hub, which I don't think I did last week. So I guess I'll do it today. But what I'm saying is you have to make even 5 minutes for yourself and put yourself first. So you are correct, for sure.
Yeah. And it's just it's a team. And sometimes the family caregivers don't always know the rules and I'm not talking necessarily health rules, but just it's a game that changes every day.
Mm-hmm.
So, some of the things that I hear, likely if I had the biggest complaint here, is that you never know for sure when home care is showing up. And
yep. Oh yeah. And
especially with Alzheimer's and dementia is that it's very seldom the same person twice. So it increases the anxiety for the patient. And
exactly.
I don't regard to those because but that seems to be some of the biggest stress. And I mean, I have a bit of black humor.
I like that.
Because I read in posts where somebody says, they're so angry, they get so angry when I leave, they yell and scream at me, and so like it's just easier if I stay, but yet they've been yelling and screaming for 8 hours anyway.
Right.
Like, I know you're going to get yelled at, but you're going to get yelled at anyway. So if you can have an hour where you're not yelled at, then go take it.
Right.
So sometimes it's just having a different perspective, but by then you're already worn down. Like if it's one of those days, and it's the energy to just be able to say I can go out, or they go for an hour and they're gone for 40 minutes and aren't sure what they kind of go, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and it's hard. There's no it's a fine line between you know, I mean, I don't know. I give until it hurts. So I get that. I give until it hurts. And I don't know, I guess mainly maybe I've just become, I mean, I've been doing this since I was 18. I'm 32 now. So it's been a long time. It's the only thing that I've ever done. And I guess I know for myself when it is time for, if the teeniest, tiniest little things are irritating me and I know I don't have patience, then I know I'm burnt out. I know I'm tired. And that's usually the 2-year mark, you know, with a job. You know, I mean, I was a living caregiver for 24-hour shifts a week for 2 years with a lady who was bipolar and had undiagnosed dementia. And that took every single ounce of everything out of me. It took everything. And, you know, and I often found myself in this space where I thought, you know, why am I sacrificing my happiness for somebody who, you know, there's other jobs out there. You know, I'm a skilled, experienced caregiver. But this is what happened, was that upon caring for this person and becoming the sole person to care for everything, right? Like, I found that I couldn't trust other caregivers to do things that I needed them to do while I was gone. Yeah. So I got used to taking care of things while I was there so that they didn't have to do anything and I didn't have to deal with it when I got back, right? It was already taken care of. And I kind of learned to exist in that space. But I love this lady. I love her family. And my presence in her life had greatly improved her life. So I got stuck in this place where, even though I'm a professional caregiver and this is a job, I'm now emotionally invested with this patient, this client, and her care and her family. And I would always think to myself, if I left, then what would she do? How would that drastically, you know, impact her life? Because I just was seeing the care that she was being provided, you know, not that it wasn't adequate care, because she was always fed, she was always toileted, she was always dressed, she was always clean. But that spiritual thing, that connection that happens sometimes between you and another person in order to provide them care to where they want to thrive, you know, sometimes people just don't have that, and people aren't provided that care. So I know what it's like to be extremely tired, extremely burnt out, and not have any support, even as a professional caregiver. For sure. On that tangent.
Yeah. And that's, you know, certainly I often get asked about providing services to professional caregivers, and for a while got stuck in the belief, you know, with the coalition we had, which was specific for family, friends, and neighbors,
right?
You know, kind of with this, you know, odd belief now. I think, I mean, that the coalition can only do so much, and that was, you know, definitely their focus. But, you know, part of it was this underlying belief that if you're a professional, there's supports there for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe that to always be true.
Absolutely. I've often said that, and I don't know what it's like in Canada, but here in the States, I don't know if your regulations and your mandates and your laws are the same as ours here. Or how, like, a lot of care facilities here are run by huge, massive corporations. And usually it's the bottom line is always the almighty dollar at the sacrifice of patient care and caregiver sanity. So, you know, and I've definitely certified nurses' aides, professional caregivers in the States, we have it rough. The demands are difficult. I mean, you have to get up between 8 to 10 to 12 people in a 2-hour window, and they all have to look good. They all have to be bathed. They all have to be in the dining room by 8 o'clock. So, and then we're short-staffed and we don't have the support from our DNSs, our nurse managers, or our nurses. And that's another gap. We're not working together. We're not understanding that teamwork makes the dream work, and we're all here to care for these people. And I think that, I don't know, there's nothing here in the States, at least that I've found, that's ever said, here, you're a certified nurse's aide, and here are resources for you, even for self-care. You know, I don't think there's ever, I mean, not that I've ever found anything that supports the professional caregiver to say, we recognize the job that you do. You know, and I just feel like the healthcare system is a friggin' mess. At least it is in the U.S. I don't know about Canada.
Well, I think we have some, you know, some of it's better, but some of the issues are the same. And long-term care, certainly there's government-run places, and most are owned by people. You know, if they choose to, you know, see the investment in their staff and some their support. But, you know, and government-wise, like even think with nurses and within our own, the provincial healthcare, you know, there's different ways that they get their training and professional development, but I'm not sure how much support they get, like their own emotional and spiritual support.
Right. And that's why I love hospice. It wasn't until I got involved with hospice and that I really, this last year, because I've only been working in hospice, directly in hospice, although I've taken care of many hospice patients, you know, through agencies and long-term care. But the platform is different. It's interdisciplinary. It's the first time I'm sitting down with social workers and nurses, and we're working as a team to manage this person's care. And our bereavement coordinators are always reaching out to us as clinicians to offer bereavement counseling, to offer, I mean, they offer Reiki to us, they offer yoga to us. I mean, there's just so many, there's the support that the company that I'm with, I've never experienced in 14 years of healthcare. So this is like the holy grail for me, but I mean, it's not there. And so I've often found myself thinking to myself, man, I really wish that healthcare adopted the holistic platform that hospice does. So nobody would ever have to wait till end of life to receive that care. You know, and I mean, there's bad about hospices too. You hear it all the time, and you know, we work, I don't know. Do you guys have hospice care in Canada?
Yeah.
Because our hospice is run and funded by Medicare, CMS. So all of our mandates, all of our regulations are run by Medicare. And so for hospice patients, Medicare is very strict on the fact that they want a 6-month or less diagnosis. And we have 2-month benefit periods where every 2 months we have to sit down, we have to go over the case. Has this person either declined or have they improved? And if they've improved, we have to release them from our services. Which I just read an article is a pretty controversial thing because, as you said, you watched your husband, die for 3 years. Yeah. So that is often longer than 2 months. And
I'm trying to, like, at that point, I think that the 6-month thing where it fit for us was with some of the employment benefits that I would have. I could take caregiver's leave, but the doctor had to sign off that death was imminent within 6 months. And because it wasn't for a long time, that time that I needed that time,
right?
Because the doctor wouldn't sign off because the cancer was still stable. But that is generally, I think, the same rule. It still is within 6 months. And we were in Saskatchewan, so that put him into the palliative care program.
Okay.
And then hospice is often like when I think of hospice, I think of the actual building more than I think of the care.
Right.
The palliative care, which can last, it's still technically you're within 6 months, but they'll often put you in sooner because more medications are paid and more like there's some of those benefits that help. I think like we had insurance anyway, so medication was covered, but we got the handicap.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And it's funny because like with our hospice, like we have, our hospice is also home health and palliative care. So we have like technically 3 entities operating under the same thing. And sometimes we like, I'll pick up home health patients if I'm low, if I'm low. It's not the right thing to say. My caseload has dwindled and I need to get my hours. I will pick up home health patients. And the processes are so different. Like I had one lady, her catheter fell out. And like for me on hospice, when something happens like that, my lifeline, and I'm out in the field, my lifeline is my triage nurses. I can call them 24 hours a day. I can call them, even if it's just to say, I need you to add a PRN visit for this patient. And so if something happens like that, that's who I'm calling. I don't have to wait on orders. I don't have to wait on doctors. Basically, we send out a nurse like that. And it's nice to have that at your fingertips. But when I had this home health patient, her catheter came out, and now we're waiting on the doctor to sign orders for extra RN visits to come out and fix this catheter. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, man, that sucks. Now, who knows when that doctor is going to do that? And how long does she have to live without this catheter? I mean, like I'm saying, it's so many fine lines to what it is that we do.
Yeah. And home is always different than in care.
For sure. So you know what I want to get into? I want to get into the Caregivers Lighthouse. What is the Caregivers Lighthouse? What is it that you do? How do you speak and educate and do all the badass things you do, Lorna?
Oh, the badass. I think I was called that once in my life. It wasn't quite that.
Well, you are from Medicine Hat.
Yeah. The Caregivers Lighthouse is, in one way is my business, but it's meant to, like, truly, I chose that to be the beacon of light for those people in the stormy seas, for the warm fuzziness part of that. Through that, like after I published my book, and I decided to go into doing more programs and services with the Caregivers Lighthouse. So I do workshops. I do some online things. I've got some online courses that I've developed. Sometimes that's, I've done a lot of learning with some of those online. My own learning has likely been as immense as anybody else's. So it really is to support caregivers for who they are. So what did I think the other day? It's kind of like most people who are attracted to what I do are women. There's a couple of men, but most are women. So it's almost like for the woman inside, because I do think there's lots, maybe not enough, who can help teach how to get somebody from a bed to a chair, or if they have to do a bedpan or foot rubs. There's some of those practical pieces. There's some resources there available. The self-care mantra is everywhere, in my opinion. Again, there's lots of it, maybe not enough. I've had a few reflections over the last few months on that whole thing, and part of what I like when you're talking, just kind of about accepting and allowing, is that sometimes we just need to accept and allow what is. And sometimes, I like the, get 5 minutes a day, because that can be manageable. Sometimes, telling people self-care stuff to do something through, I started feeling like I was a bully.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people say that. I wish you would quit telling me to take care of myself. You know what I mean? Because right now I just can't.
Yeah. So that's part of kind of where a little bit of a tweaking in what I'm doing is maybe more less saying this is caregiving and this is how to do it, because I, like you said earlier, like there's no rule book, so like who am I to say?
Right.
I can say, if here's how you can have, maybe have some impact on yourself, maybe whether it's self-esteem or self-confidence or some courage, some hope, some joy. I absolutely believe there can be joy everywhere. It isn't always happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't always show up 24 hours a day. But when we choose, we can find joy somewhere.
Right.
And that's a different feeling than happiness, and it's a different than fun. But it is one of the best feelings to ever grab when you can. So I talk a lot about joy, because it wasn't I wasn't happy watching my husband die.
Right.
Having our 2-year-old grandson's birthday party, his second birthday party in the palliative care hospital room, we had some joy.
Right.
Was there happiness because, we just kind of said, yes, give him one more transfusion because we don't want him to die on our grandson's birthday.
Right. Right.
But, that sometimes you can, it's kind of weird, but it's making those choices and seeing that some of them are available. And I consider myself a bit of a creative solution finder. So sometimes where people don't always see solutions, I see things that people don't see, that I can't explain how I do that. It just happens.
That's your gift, Lorna.
Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It can help. Most of the time, if I express it, by the end of the time, somebody feels better.
Right.
And, so I know that they work. I base a lot of what I work. What really changed for us in the caregiving was the passion test. And it's a process where you find the 5 most important things to you at the time. And I hadn't realized how much I resisted the caregiving role that I had. And I didn't want to be that resentful, bitter caregiver. That was what I was focused on. So when I did the passion test, I wanted to find out what was really true for me because of all the things that had happened. And much to my surprise, my number one passion was caring for my husband. And that's kind of like, oh, okay.
It's so funny though, because I kind of had to say the same thing. I tried to start a business, a little internet marketing business. And I just kept saying, oh, I'm going to do this business and I'm going to quit providing care. And while I was on this journey, I found that this is my purpose.
Yeah.
That being a caregiver and providing good care and speaking and talking about it is my purpose. That I didn't need to start some business away from caregiving. That this is my business. This is my purpose and my passion in life. So it's funny how those things sneak up on you.
And you can express it in different, like whether it's working as a CNA, or you go and speak to RN conferences, or like whatever it is, it can be expressed. I wrote a book. I'm planning to write another one, but I haven't got my butt in the seat to do it. But what I realized in the last few months, because last year, honestly, Cassidy, the whole online thing, and it's just, I felt like I was banging my head against the wall because I couldn't seem to break through. And then I had some advice in March from somebody who's like a very influential publisher and online.
I have an idea who that is.
And he basically said, it's going to be a challenge. Anything that we've ever produced for caregivers doesn't sell because, and I mean, this sounds like it's about money, but I need to pay my bills. But I wanted to share that passion as well. And he said they're just into it in that space so much that they really don't have the capacity. And finally the light bulb went on, and I can remember sitting in my living room saying no to a coaching program that I knew would be so helpful for me, because I couldn't commit, because it took me 1.5 years to even be able to keep a dental appointment. So how the hell was I gonna a coaching program? And I'm going, and that kind of hit me, because I went, so why am I asking all these other people to do what I know I couldn't do? So, you know, it's been a bit of a, you know, where do I really fit in with this? So, right. You know, I think the offering of the services and doing some of the things that I've done are going to continue. I've picked up some of the work for our local coalition, which keeps me involved, you know, and connected with some of the people I've been connected with.
When you work with the Alberta Mental, is that a coalition?
Community Mental Health Association.
Yes. Okay.
So that's Canadian, and every place has their little spot. So they don't provide, they provide programming and mostly programs and services for mental health clients. They don't do any counseling. Okay. So they do like housing programs and that kind of seniors outreach is through them now. So they are a funder. They're kind of keeping some of we had an anonymous donor, so they've received the funding, and then I do the programming. Because our offices are closing. Like Canadian Cancer Society has closed their office here. Multiple sclerosis didn't replace their client care coordinator. Spinal Injury Alberta closed their office. Like just the people who are around the table with the coalition, they just don't exist anymore.
Wow.
It got so small and it got small when we started, and then we got money. Like a little bit of money. It's not a lot of money. By any means, it's not a lot of money. Right. You know, we'll be able to do a full day workshop and do a 1-hour coffee group a month, and maybe a little bit more. The partnership with Parkinson's, Alberta, you know, they're kind of looking after the organizing, and the donation money is paying for the 5-week course. So, and that is really the 3 things that I want to do most in life is speak, write, and teach. Me too. When I focus on those, you know, it might be some one-on-one support, but what I found, and this will be my big shout out and ask to anybody who's listening, you know, it's going to the groups who can partner to bring me in. So I just got booked again to go to the Family Caregiver Center in Calgary. Awesome. I did that in February, and I'm going. So it's to make those. So I still get to speak to the caregivers. I still get to do what I want to do. I still get to support them, but I'm not asking more from them than they give. Yeah, they just show up. They don't have to. While Parkinson's, it's a 5-week course, and members pay $10 and non-members pay $15. So it's not, you know, it's $3 a week at the most expensive. Yeah. You know, so it's keeping that, because the reality is, for most people, that is a concern. And then, you know, to be able to do some of the advocating and speaking, and I'll be in Chicago for the National Caregivers Conference in November. Yay! I bring 2 workshops, one on the Friday and one on the Saturday. So that is exciting. One is, you know, one is for, both of them are applicable for both, like whether it's before, during, or after. And the other one I put in as for after, and it's about my self formula that I've created to look after your spirit, you know, your own spirit, your soul, your energy, self-love and fun, and, you know, kind of coming out of that caregiving piece. So that's exciting. So well, good. I'm so happy for you, Lorna. And I love what you're doing. Do not stop what you're doing. I'm on the same boat with you. I'm on this journey. I started the Caregivers Hub, and I did actually start out as a fan page. Didn't even start out as a support group. And now it is home to 1,500 members all over the world now. And
it's just my platform. It is my support group as much as it is anybody else's support group. It's my place where I get to come up and love up on my hubbers and help them through those things that they're going through with the knowledge and the skills that I have, and that makes me happy. So if you ever have anything that anybody can go into the Caregivers Hub and create a file. And Lorna, if you want to go create a file and put in all your resources, I am all about more resources for caregivers in whatever capacity that they are.
Yeah. And there's lots that I do that is, you know, they're easy to access. They're free of charge.
Exactly. That's one thing that when I had the idea for the Caregivers Hub was, you know, I mean, the Caregivers Hub really truly stemmed from me realizing that as a CNA of 14 years, I'm not just a glorified butt wiper. I'm a skilled clinician, and I have skills that are valuable. And that's what I want professional caregivers to know, is for all the crap we catch in this industry, you are still valuable. You have skills that other people don't have. You can mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually take care of somebody, and that is a big skill to have. Well, so,
and I know you're on that wavelength. When you can do that, then, you know, it's amazing who shows up to be cared for.
Exactly. I am a firm believer that the universe, you know, I always kind of look at that, you know, okay, I have this patient and maybe they're a little, maybe it's challenging. Maybe it's a lot more work than I wanted to designate for this hour. You know, like I have a patient, which, you know, I have a patient and she's very much at the end of life and she's in a lot of pain. She has a lot of wounds, and, you know, I've had to extend my visits from 1 hour to almost 3 just to be able to really provide her the care that she needs, because it's not just physical. She's emotionally in pain while you are physically providing her care. And that takes, you know, it takes that time to provide her care. And so I've had to designate that time. And yes, I lost what I was saying. Completely forgot what I was saying.
Well, it was about who shows up when you know what it is that you need.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they come to me. So I always think to myself, okay, I'm here for a reason. You were put in this person's path for a reason. You were here today for a reason. And sometimes, you know, it is, I'm a big believer that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and they're going to tell you everything you need to know always. Whether you're hurting, whether you're in pain, whether you're happy. And that's how I end up communicating with people who can't communicate. It's because I look at their eyes and I can tell. And there's a specific time. And most often than not, you have to know the right time to ask. But I can see in someone's eyes when they're ready. And I'll simply ask, is it time? And more often than not, they'll look me in the eye and they'll say, yeah. Or I think so. I think so. And so that is the soul work that I do. That is why I do what I do, because in that moment, when that person is in pain and they're scared, I have the ability to look them in the eye and tell them that it's okay. It's going to be okay. You're okay. And more often than not, it is like a big sigh of relief. Okay, I am okay right now. So yes, the universe sends me people all the time, even if it's just for one day, and that one time I've seen them, I've always made an impact on them. So the universe always sends you people that you need.
Yes, I agree with that.
Well, my dear sweet Lorna, it is 6:30 and I have to go eat dinner. So we're going to take our leave, but we do this, like I said, every single month, first Sunday of the month, 5 p.m. If you want to be on a Google Hangout with me, comment below, hit me up on the Facebook group, which you can have access through to the Caregivers Hub fan page, facebook.com Caregivers Hub 15. There's a link that will take you straight to the support group, and then you can join. And it's a great community. It's uncensored. We use passionate, colorful curse words to describe what we're going through on a daily. And if you don't like that, then I guess maybe then this isn't the group for you. But we practice respect and non-judgment. And I love all of you hubbers. Lorna, thank you so much for being with me today. And like I said, seriously, go in the hub, create a file, whatever you want to share. Don't give up. Keep pushing forward.
Oh, no, I'm having too much fun these days.
I know, right? Like you met Jack Canfield, did you not?
I am certified in the Canfield methodology. So I'm one of the trainers.
Yay!
Work that I use with caregivers, which is what makes me different from nearly anyone who is doing this work, because I use what he teaches and it works for all of them. Like
Perfect.
So many people are drawn to business with his work, but using it with caregivers, it's that and the passion test are two beautiful things, and both of them.
Soul work is soul work. Soul work is soul work.
It is.
All right.
So thank you so much, and
so
thank you, hubbers, and I'll see what I can get posted in those files.
Awesome.
There.